What if I told you that this simple exercise made me a much better painter, but it doesn't require the use of any paint whatsoever? You might find it ridiculous, but think about it. The deep fundamental connection between drawing and painting is well known. It's actually hard to know where drawing stops really and where painting starts. One thing is for sure, it's extremely hard to master figurative painting if you struggle with drawing. So, first, let me introduce this exercise for you and I'll explain how it helped me become a better painter and how it might help you as well. First thing we need is a model. We're going to do a master copy of Velázquez's The Water Cellar of Seville, and you can do this one or any master picture you like, preferably with a strong chiaroscuro. You can either print it like I did, and as you can see, the quality of the colors is not super important, so you can print it in black and white with a standard quality printer. It doesn't make a huge difference, it's just practice. Or another option is to cut it from an art magazine, just really as you prefer. Next, you want to take some good quality watercolor paper and make either an acrylic wash or a watercolor wash. Any type of background tone will work, and for this one I tried to make a yellow-brown similar to the model. Just tape the surface right next to the model on the drawing board and gather some charcoal material. Here's what you're going to need. Some charcoal. My favorite brand is Nineteenth, but for this exercise any good quality charcoal might do the job. You'll also need a kneaded eraser, which we are going to use extensively, and a small brush, which is dry and clean. So here's what we are going to do. Cover the entire surface with charcoal. Press lightly, but make it very dark. And then start lifting off the highlights with the kneaded eraser as if it was a paint layer full of wet paint. And it is very similar in a way. The only difference is that it doesn't contain any fluid medium, but charcoal is so light that it is almost as fluid as paint. It's not technically fluid, but behaves like a fluid in a similar manner. And that's the property that we'll be using to our advantage to operate this sort of transition between drawing and painting. It doesn't work with anything other than charcoal. It needs to be light and powdery like this. So forget about chalks, black pencils and all that. Only natural charcoal will have this effect. See how you can move it around like if it was paint, and even if you put your finger in it, it's almost like wet paint, right? The idea for this video actually came from Brenda on Patreon, and she was trying to learn how to paint but had a hard time because she felt that her drawing skills were not giving her enough confidence and that she was missing something. Charcoal can be used as a transitionary technique to understand how to draw with paint and how to move along further. However, in your mind, you need to draw with charcoal as if it was paint. So for this exercise, we'll try to avoid lines and focus on masses of values instead. So we don't want to block in with lines, but start immediately with this big value tone on the entire surface from which we lift off the light masses. And that's very important for this exercise. Avoid at all cost tracing lines and try to see the model as just a bunch of big value shapes, as you should do for a painting. See, it's tricky to learn how to paint because you need to focus both on the shapes, on the proportions, which is kind of the quote drawing part of the painting, and at the same time you need to learn how to handle the brush, how the paint behaves on the canvas, and this would be the actual painting part. And doing both at the same time might actually be detrimental to both. In this video, we'll see how to separate the quote drawing part of the painting from the actual painting part of the painting. So, very clearly, the goal of this exercise is to represent the model as accurately as possible without using lines and with a somewhat painterly approach. Very quickly, if you like my approach and want to learn more, I just wanted to inform you that I'm currently working on a new drawing course. I can't tell you when exactly it will be available, but in the meantime, if you're interested, know that I also have 2 painting courses available. My first course focused on oil painting techniques, and my second course is more advanced and focuses on color theory and its applications for painters. If you want to have a look, all the links are in the description. Alright, let's go back to the video. For this exercise, you want to imagine that your drawing tools are actually paintbrushes. I know it sounds silly, but it's not as silly as trying to paint when you know that your drawing skills are holding you back. So let's give it a try, shall we? One of the best tools we have at our disposal is the kneaded eraser. It's not just made to erase stuff. It's above all an amazing drawing tool, but a drawing tool that works negatively. The greatest thing about it is that you can really shape it however you like. That's why we can easily shape it into what resembles either a flat brush or a filbert, or even for finer marks, a round brush with a very pointed tip. This variety is important because here the goal is to approach the master copy as if we were using a brush full of paint instead of charcoal. So basically our kneaded eraser is just like using light paint with a brush. When we use our charcoal stick, we have to imagine this time that it's just a round brush full of darker paint, and we can also use an actual brush. In the case of a dry technique like charcoal, a brush is not very useful, of course, but the dust is so light in this case that you can easily at least push it around a little bit and shape it with the dry brush. The brush will mostly remove some of the dust, so we should see it as a brush and imagine that it's full of light paint. To be honest, you don't really have to imagine that your drawing tools are like brushes like this. It's mostly a reminder that you're doing a drawing exercise with a painting goal in mind. Whatever approach you decide to take, what matters is to focus on 2 things: shapes and proportions, and more specifically, how to get accurate proportions with shapes only, values only. So how can you do that? A key precept of any type of figurative art is that you want to work from big to small. It's the same idea with a painting. Usually you'd start with the large brushes first, lay down the very first basic shapes and refine little by little using the smallest detailed brush at the very end. Think about a block of marble if you wish. First, you get a very basic block, then you cut off the edges and then you refine, and only at the end you polish. It might seem obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many people get sucked in by details at an early stage. You want to avoid details as much as possible, and that's another reason why this exercise works so well. Charcoal is not ideal for detail, far from it. It's very clumsy compared to a fine graphite point. But it's actually better this way. We want to first work on the broader shapes and check by comparing to our model as often as possible. We want to try to forget about the details, or at least keep them for the very end. To help you work on the proportions, you want to work with your sheet of paper and the model side by side and at the same scale. This is a method called side size. Sure, you're not always going to work side size, so don't get too attached to this technique. It's mostly a learning tool. However, it helps a lot if you struggle with proportions and if you have a hard time with the quote drawing part of the painting. The real problem with proportions, you see, is that it requires a lot of visual memorization. Very short term, but very intensive visual memory. Basically, you need to remember the exact size and proportion of a given shape on your model for just enough time to turn your head and put your arm in place. It's not that long, like 2 or maybe 3 seconds, but the thing you have to remember is extremely refined and requires super high accuracy. Because this exercise uses the site size method, it reduces the memorization burden by facilitating visual comparison. In short, the model is right next to the subject, so it's very easy to go back and forth and check if your memorization attempt was correct. With time, it becomes a habit. And this exercise, the site size part of it in particular, will boost your visual memory and help you retain more information for a longer amount of time. This will make you better at drawing from any reference in any condition outside of the site size specifically, and it will, more importantly, it will make you better at painting with accurate proportions from a model. If there's one thing to remember, it's this: the values describe the shapes describe the subject. The value is a measure of the degree of brightness of the surface, i.e. whether it's light or dark. Value is not only a concept related to black and white drawing, because it also applies to painting with color, which is why it's so crucial to work on your drawing skills before you can easily transition to painting. Of the 3 dimensions of colors that exist, value, hue, and chroma, value is the only one that makes sense by itself, which makes it possible to recognize and appreciate an image in black and white. A lot of people think that they can just skip drawing and start painting immediately. You can, obviously, nobody's holding you back, but you shouldn't expect to create realistic looking figurative paintings, let alone portraits. If you really want to start painting without a solid drawing foundation, you should aim for something less accurate, more expressive maybe. That's not trying to be accurately figurative, more like naive art, for example. If your goal is to paint classical portraits, traditional figures, then in that case, you kind of need to start with a good drawing foundation. So basically that's the exercise. Now, how much of this type of practice should you do? It depends. In my opinion, you should do it until you feel confident that you get it. Like the shapes, the proportions, there's no secret for you. You should do it until you're certain that now the only thing tricky for you is to do the same but with a paintbrush. Basically, with this exercise, we tried to separate the drawing part of the drawing process. So doing this will help you build a solid foundation until you feel confident that the only thing left for you to work on is what is only about just having paint and having a brush in your hand. And you guessed it, the next step, the natural next step is just to maybe do the exact same project but with a grisaille, in which you use some titanium white, raw umber, ivory black with actual paint and actual paintbrushes this time. And you can work on the same project, but this time you'll see how it is all of a sudden much easier, because the only thing you have to focus on is how do I put the right amount of paint with the right value at the right spot. You don't have to worry about color, and you don't have to worry about the entire drawing side of the painting process, the proportions, the shapes. You know that you have this nailed to the exact level of accuracy that you need, and the only thing you need to figure out for the rest of your painting journey is how to figure out how the paint behaves, how to control it, how to get the right amount of paint on your brush, and all that, which is specifically about painting. And separating both sides of the painting process can help you tremendously. It helped me at least, so I hope you got something out of this demonstration. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. If you liked it, remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to support the channel. Again, a huge thank you to my Patreon members. This video wouldn't be possible without your support. You'll find the full version of this video on Patreon. If you want to join the community, you'll just find the link in the description below. You'll also find the links to both my courses, my oil painting course, and my cutter course. Alright, that's it for today. As always everyone, joy and inspiration to you. Bye.